Well, people hear about the annual deficit. They hear about the national debt. The national debt's somewhere around $9 trillion. But the real number that matters, and really the only number that matters, is unfunded liabilities of 55 trillion plus. In that, the difference is these are numbers that we know, or these are obligations that we know we owe future generations. These are promises that we have made, and we have no idea how we're going to pay it. And so the way the government looks at its accounting responsibilities, or the way it reports the fiscal situation of this country, is very short term. It looks at what bills we have to pay essentially in the next year, rather than, as companies are required to do, we've made an obligation over a period of time, and we have to account for that or accrue for that or kind of set money aside for that because we have made a promise that we have to keep. So the federal government has made promises that it has to keep, but it hasn't essentially set the money aside. And so the difference between the 9 trillion and the 55 trillion are the unkept promises. These are the promises we know we have, but we have no idea how we're going to pay them. And we have to start putting the programs and policies in place that are going to fund those liabilities. And the only way we're going to do that is if the American people understand it, by making sure our public officials share that information, and then make sure that they actually start to have a policy debate that will result in responsible policies that will meet these promises and these unfunded liabilities.
Since the government isn't putting out the numbers needed to make knowledgeable decisions, I believe it is very valuable for the Institute for Truth in Accounting to calculate and publicize such numbers.
Because the government's not willing to do it, somebody has to do it. And the Institute for Truth in Accounting, I think, is a great vehicle for making sure that the American people understand what the obligations are. Making sure the American people understand that if we don't act soon, we're going to have very limited options, and all those that are left are going to be extremely painful. And so if we act now, I think that there are responsible things that we can do. And so the Institute for Truth in Accounting, I think, is simply trying to say, look at the problem. It's not going to go away on its own. It's something that we simply can't ignore, and we have to find a way to get people's attention. And the way to get people's attention that are asking for your vote is say, I'm not going to vote for you unless you give me an answer that I can believe in and take stock in, that you understand this, and that you're going to be serious if you're elected or you retain your office, that you're going to try to get beyond the politics, trying to get beyond kind of the way things have been done, which has resulted in ignoring the problem and kind of slipping it under the rug, and say, we're serious, so you better be serious.
Great.
I didn't hear a little bit, but okay.
The Institute for Truth in Accounting is an organization that, the Institute for Truth in Accounting is an organization that shows that a small group of dedicated, well-organized individuals can.
Democracy's act in crisis, somebody really smart said. We're heading for a crisis. And I think it's amazing how a small group of people who are organized and dedicated to a cause can avoid that crisis by making sure that more people understand what the looming crisis is and helping people understand how we can avoid it. And the first step in avoiding it, again, is by defining it, by making sure we use the proper accounting methods that lead to good policy discussions. And everything that the Institute for Truth in Accounting is doing is trying to avoid that crisis and trying to leverage the efforts of a small group of people into hopefully a movement of a large group of people that will hold our elected officials responsible for addressing this issue in a very responsible way before it gets too late and too painful. When I was in office, I held hundreds of town hall meetings, and it was always frustrating when I'd go to a town hall meeting and talk about these issues and people kind of gave me a blank stare. And I would say that this is the most important issue that we face as a nation. It's more important than the war on terror. It's more important than the healthcare crisis, because if we don't solve this problem, we don't have a Department of Defense, we don't have Medicare and Medicaid, we don't have a healthcare system. And so it is frustrating when people don't understand it, but it's understandable because they haven't been exposed to the information or the truth. And so everything we can do to expose the truth, and it as mundane as it sounds, it starts with truth in accounting. It starts with defining the problem in a way people can understand it. And then I think we can start to broaden the awareness. And when members of Congress have town hall meetings, the best thing that could happen is that everyone in the room stands up and screams at the member of Congress and says, "Fix this problem." And when we get there, we'll know we're making progress. I think people might ask themselves, what in the world can I do? This is a huge problem. It's beyond my comprehension. But I think everyone can play a role. I think that they can sign up for the Truth in 2008 newsletter. They can go to the Institute for Truth in Accounting website. They can tell their friends and their neighbors and make them aware of this problem, because the only way that Congress acts is when they go home and they hear about issues. Congress is not a leadership organization, it's a reactionary organization, and they react when they hear their constituents complain about specific issues and when people are concerned about issues that face them and their families and their communities. And there is no issue that's more important to them, their families, and their communities than this, because as we talked about, if we don't address this, almost nothing else matters, because our country will be bankrupt. We have very limited options on how to address our economic problems. And not to sound overly alarmist, but it's all there in black and white if we can get the federal government to account for it in an accurate way that shows the magnitude of the problem, and that's the first step in the process. I'd recommend that people let their members of Congress know that they're aware of this problem. Write letters to their members of Congress offices, go to town hall meetings, try to talk to their member of Congress personally about it, because the more members of Congress are aware that people are aware, the more aware they will make themselves and the more serious they will take this problem. Because right now, unfortunately, many members of Congress don't really understand the magnitude of the problem. But they will certainly educate themselves if they go home and they hear about this on a consistent basis. If you get 10 calls in a congressional office on one day on one issue, that's kind of an emergency. They start to really pay attention. So if they get 100 calls, that would be even better. And so, again, I think we have to hold our elected officials responsible and let them know we understand this and let them know we're watching them.